Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss how, as the UK continues to be distracted by the fallout from Brexit, the EU are working on a deal with the United States that threatens to completely isolate us from the next epoch of manufacturing. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. Right, so while I wait for the chair of the BBC to work out the best face-saving way to wave the white flag and resign from his position, what shall we talk about? I know, Brexit. Apologies if he's already resigned, by the way, I'm not doing this live. But as I've said many times before, the Tories' Get Brexit Done slogan of 2019 wasn't just about attracting pro-Brexit votes, but anti-Brexit votes as well. It sounds a bit mad, but the Tories had observed that, there are lots of shades of grey when it came to Brexit opinions. Some were in favour of Brexit, some were against, but there was a whole sliding scale and there was a load of people that had an opinion one way or the other, but wasn't necessarily the most important thing in their lives. They may have been in favour of Brexit, but actually it's been going on too long. Oh, do you want a referendum to decide whether they should leave or not? Yeah, fine, I don't care. Equally, there were people going, look, we shouldn't really leave. It's clearly going to be damaging, but we're sick of it dragging on and on and on. They didn't necessarily know that if their deadlock wasn't about to be broken, there would have been another referendum the next year. Boris Johnson offered them the opportunity. He said, it will end. It will all be over. The torture will be over. Just vote for me. And so they thought to themselves, well, I don't think it's a good idea leaving, but it probably won't be disastrous. And I just want it to be over. What many who would have voted against Brexit hated was the whole argument stifling all government activity. They could see that the national infrastructure was crumbling as politicians spent all their time arguing about Brexit instead of running the country. Boris Johnson, as I say, vocalised this sentiment. He said, vote for us and it all stops. We'll leave the EU. I have an oven-ready deal. The arguments stop a few weeks after I get a majority. It's all then done. In the rear-view mirror, we can then focus on everything else. So some pro-EU voters voted for the Conservatives, partly for the promise of putting Brexit to bed. There were a few other issues as well, of course. And in the expectation that government would then focus on healthcare, education, the economy and so on. Not really how it's turned out, has it? Because every government decision still now has to pass through the filter of Brexit. In fact, they're explicit about it. It's not just me observing this, they're explicit. Every government decision, every policy has to meet some sort of Brexit test. Is it really in the spirit of Brexit? In reality, the only way to stop this happening was to have not left the EU. That was the only way to have actually put Brexit to bed. Even Labour are going to have to be forced to have a Brexit dimension to all their policies because leaving the EU has disrupted everything. And now we have a very serious problem in terms of the future of our economy. Losing trade is one thing and inevitably slows economic growth down. Of course it does. But what are we going to produce in the future? See, the future is green. It has to be because the world has reached the tipping point that scientists warned about when I was growing up. But the UK is struggling. We can't even establish a base for producing electric cars, an example of green technology that is in the here and now. If we cannot produce our own cells, there's not really much point in making many of our own cars because we won't be able to sell them anywhere outside of Britain at a competitive price. But what about the green technology of tomorrow? Same problem. Even if we somehow did develop new technology in the UK, we can't manufacture it here. If it will sell better if it's manufactured in the EU, they'll just move to the EU. And this issue was brought into sharp focus by President Biden initiating his Inflation Reduction Act, essentially legislation which funded a huge tax breaks for the development of green technology in America. But the act is hideously illegal, dead against World Trade Organization rules. It's a hugely protectionist piece of legislation which effectively punishes the use of materials produced outside the USA. But not even the EU thought about challenging the legality of it. Normally they would. Something like this. The legislation, after all, will push a revolution in the technology needed to literally safeguard the future of the human race. How do you argue against something like that? How do you try and take someone to court over something like that? So the EU made no attempt to even try. They put their minds to how they can adapt. The old adage, if you can't beat them, join them. It would mean almost certainly breaching WTO rules themselves, would certainly require loosening state aid rules. They're going to have to do some reforming here. But they have to do something, otherwise the EU loses some of its economic power in the future, and with that, its power to drive up standards around the world. And all of this already put the UK in a precarious position because we're on the outside now. We used to be one of the three major decision makers inside, one of the three economic superpowers of the world. Now we're on our own, nowhere near the same league. And it's difficult to identify a country we may end up being like, because no other country has done what we've done. There are some isolated countries, like Belarus and North Korea, but they tie themselves to powerful sponsors, Russia and China respectively. We haven't done that, so we're just on our own. And the real tragedy is it's not just that we're in this unnecessarily difficult position, but we're not even trying to make the best of it. The Tories are still wrangling over Brexit over 3 years since promising that it would be done and dusted. Sunak gets his protocol deal and then a few days later cast doubt on our involvement in Horizon. This was supposed to be our big reward for settling the protocol. And now Sunak says he might not even want it. It's like a kid eating their vegetables. Then say, "Now, do you want your pudding?" "No, I'm not sure I want my pudding now." You what? The Tories are still squabbling amongst themselves with the UK sitting around going nowhere. The rest of the world, meanwhile, is focused on the future of their economies. The EU has agreed a deal in principle with President Biden whereby the United States will treat materials mined or processed in the EU as if they were from the US. That surprised me. That would be massive. Obviously, you can imagine the deal will meet some resistance amongst other American lawmakers. It's not a done deal yet. But there must be a reason Biden agreed to it. And so the EU must have made an offer that is in America's overall interests. But the point is that while our government bickers amongst itself and distracts the rest of us with their petty culture wars in a desperate attempt to cling to power for a few more years, other governments are marching into the future. If the EU and the US end up working together at any level on the new revolution that's coming in manufacturing, we're dead and buried. Jingoistic national pride, misty-eyed visions of an empire long since crumbled are not going to help us stake a place for ourselves on the world stage later this century. We're going to have to do something. We're going to have to be of use to the world. What are we going to do? What are we going to offer? Brexit supporters often moan the EU is protectionist. Yes, it is. So is the United States, so is China, so is India. Given that, why did we choose to leave that protection? People thought we could go it alone. Split off, have an even better solo career. Problem was that they thought they were Robbie Williams. Turned out we were Gary Barlow. Over 3 years after that ill-advised general election, the government are not only still making every policy decision a Brexit argument, but they are still paralysing every government department with it, because everything has to be seen through the lens of Brexit. Does it meet the Brexit test? We still have no roadmap for our post-Brexit future. What's the plan for UK manufacturing? There isn't one. Just a series of aims with no plans behind them. While the rest of the world is moving on, we're like a racing driver stuck in the pits arguing with their engineer about which tyres to put on. So when Sunak was handing over a load of money to France in order to take another bit of the rough edge off of Brexit, which wouldn't have existed without it, and the British media whining about a tweet, the EU were getting agreement from the United States that materials produced in the EU count as American for the purposes of their Inflation Reduction Act. But, can't expect our government to try and sort out arrangements like that for our manufacturing. They've got football presenters to hunt down. UK now left very isolated. Bravo, Gammons. Bravo. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.